Welcome back to On Texas Football. I'm CJ Vogel, joined as always by Gerry Hamilton for this week's edition of the Recruiting Breakdown. Finally taking a look forward as the 2024 season concludes. We get to move on to the class of 26. Weird how the years work, I know, but we're starting to get some 26 prospects on campus this weekend for the Texas Junior Day. Of course, that will be taking place Saturday, January 25th. A lot going on. Not as big of a weekend this week, Gerry. Of course, we'll talk about some big-time visitors, some commits back on campus for the Longhorns, some new names getting to campus for the first time, and everything in between. But before we get to all of that, Gerry, a quick word from our sponsor, Mark Saunders and Allstate.
When it comes to protecting all your stuff, wouldn't it be great to have one place that protects all of it? Here's some great news, Texas fans. Texas Allstate agent Mark Saunders serves the Austin and Round Rock area and the entire state of Texas. He's the only insurance agent you'll need. Everything from your home, car, boat, to your motorcycle, RV, and even that ATV. Call Texas Allstate agent Mark Saunders' office today at 512-218-8571. Are you in good hands? With more than 35 years of experience, you'll be in great hands with Texas alum Mark Saunders. Again, 512-218-8571.
Perfect. Thank you, Gerry, and thank you, Mark Saunders, for sponsoring this week's Recruiting Breakdown. All right. We're starting with the top. Texas commit Dia Bell making the trip in from Florida. He'll be back on campus. This is notable for a few reasons, right? Big recruiting weekend. You'd like to have kind of the face of your class on campus to help recruit. We saw that last year with KJ Lacey, who committed very early in the class, helped build up what ended up being the number one recruiting class in the country. But also Georgia, Gerry, starting to make a push with a late offer for Dia Bell. Of course, Jared Curtis just opened up, looking elsewhere. Could they be making a run at Dia Bell? And how important is this weekend for Texas to get him back and say, all right, you're home?
Yeah, I think Texas is solid with Dia Bell, right? But teams are going to make a run. Oregon tried to make a run during the season with Dia Bell a little bit. Maybe wasn't publicized because they didn't kind of have the offer in January like Georgia did on the heels of A.J. Milwee doing an in-home visit with the Bell family. But I think Texas is at a solid spot with Dia Bell. He's all the reasons he committed remain the same, and he'll be on campus again with his family this weekend. By the way, injury update there, he should be throwing again on a field late February, early March is what it looks like. But I think Texas is in a solid spot with Dia Bell. If he shows up at any other campuses, then we have a different conversation. If schools drop by to offer him and have a conversation with him, that's what they should do. That's their job. But until he takes visits elsewhere, I think Texas remains in a really good spot with Dia Bell, obviously the quarterback, five-star quarterback commitment for the Longhorns.
Of course, I mentioned last year, KJ Lacey was a big part of these junior days, and eventually helped Texas land Jamie French, Khalid Lockett, Dalen McCutcheon. There's a pair of really talented out-of-state wide receivers making it to campus this week as well, Gerry. How much could Dia Bell help with a name or Burrows, a Jabari Mack, guys along those lines to help kind of familiarize themselves with Texas?
Yeah, so Dia Bell is helping recruit. It's a different game now because of NIL, but he is still in conversations, building relationships with a lot of guys that Texas is recruiting. John Turntine, Jalen Lott, Caden Finley. Now you see guys like Naeem Burrows, who you mentioned, who will be on campus, the jet fast receiver who I expect to run in the high 10-4s this spring for the Bowl School in Jacksonville. Him and his family are going to be on campus for the first visit to Texas. This will be their first time as a family on campus in Austin, from what we've gathered. So this will be a big visit, and it's a guy that Chris Jackson offered October 7th when he was out to see Jamie French play at Mandarin there in the Jacksonville area. So he went by Bowl School and offered Naeem Burrows, and now Naeem Burrows is going to be on campus, and we'll have a chance to meet guys like Dia Bell and have discussions with him, and maybe as important, CJ's families talking with each other. And then you have Jabari Mack from Destrehan, Louisiana, another one of the top playmaking wide receivers in the country in 2026 from the Pelican State nearby. A guy that he's been on campus before a couple of times throughout this recruitment at Texas. Terry Joseph, Chris Jackson have stayed in contact with him all the way through. A couple of guys that won't be on campus this weekend or aren't scheduled to be. You never know late in the week if things change, but Chris Jackson was out in California last week at Mater Dei to see Caden Dixon Wyatt, another top receiver, out-of-state target for Texas, not expected in this week. He's been on campus a couple of times before. He's expected back in the spring and then for a June official visit. But, yeah, Dia Bell will get to talk to, spend some time with, and families will get to spend time with each other with some of these top out-of-state receivers for the first time. And it'll be big for Sarkisian and Chris Jackson as well, because with Naeem Burrows, Florida and Clemson, Florida's real competition. When Florida starts winning again and playing good offensive football, they're tough to beat for kids in Jacksonville, Tampa, in that area. And obviously Burrows is from the Jacksonville area. So it's important to have a great weekend for Texas, because it's a little different circumstance for when Jamie French's recruitment began. Florida was not turning the corner.
Right. Right. And Texas has had success there, right? You look at the IMG kids, you look at CJ Baxter, Jamie French most recently. It's going to be more difficult, obviously, when Miami's coming off of a top 10 season and Florida looks to have some life offensively. I did want to get your thoughts on the wide receivers just a little bit more, because we did see Texas kind of target bigger bodies, kind of more route connoisseurs, if you will, in 2025. This year, you just mentioned, look, Jabari Mack's a track kid. Naeem Burrows might be running 10-4. Is that more the turn that we would expect for Sarkisian when it comes to recruiting wide receivers in general?
Yeah, well, I think it'll be interesting. So, like you said, they got their back shoulder fade guys. They got a little more size. They got 50-50 ball winners in the last class with Khalil Lockett and Jamie French. Dalen McCutcheon's very much in the DeAndre Moore mold. Caden Finley in this class is a bigger version of DeAndre Moore for me, but that means you can play outside, you can move around. But I do think they're adding – look, Texas is trying to add a speed piece in the portal for the 25 season. I think they are looking – if Naeem Burrows is a pretty elite guy, and Jabari Mack is a pretty elite guy. I think Burrows is going to end up being one of the top fastest players in this class. So he may be cut from a different cloth even than most. But I do think Texas is going to look for a speed receiver in each class, whether that comes from the portal or the high school ranks. They want to keep that while also adding more outside size going into the SEC against the taller, longer limb corners, so they can win more of those 50-50 balls. So they have more of a red zone threat in the passing game, CJ.
Makes sense, especially when you start considering who's going to be the quarterbacks for years to come. All of these guys with down the field ability with their arms, as you would expect with a Sarkisian recruit. But I did want to ask you one more time about the offensive line, because this line, this list is getting longer and bigger and stronger, as you would expect with some of these offensive linemen coming in. Headlined, obviously, by John Turntine Toa Katoa, who just recently visited Tennessee as well. But then you start looking down the list. Nicholas Robertson, Drew Evers, Max Wright, Felix Ojo. Really solid list, especially from the in-state crop as well. Yeah. What do you make of this group?
Kyle Flood and Steve Sarkisian are making their rounds in Dallas today and tomorrow, seeing these guys. They went to see Max Wright early this morning. Expected to see Felix Ojo at Mansfield Lake Ridge, John Turntine at North Crowley. You mentioned Drew Evers at Flowermount. They're going to Toa Katoa at Euless. Obviously, he's a guy that can commit to Texas right now. So Sark and Flood are going to go around and see all those guys. Ojo is expected. He hadn't confirmed it to us, but he's expected to be on campus the 25th. Toa Katoa is Nicholas Robertson, who Kyle Flood saw last Friday, I believe it was, at Klein High. He's going to be in town. Turntine, like you said, was at A&M last weekend. We'll see if he goes to Texas this weekend or not. He's been to Texas so many times. He might take an out-of-state trip this weekend, but I'd be slightly surprised if he's not on campus at Texas here in the next couple of weeks at some point in time. Not saying it's locked in, though. But, yeah, so Sark, Flood are going to be seeing this bumper crop of offensive linemen from the DFW area early this week. And that's the question, CJ. You have Adam Guthrie from Ohio, who's a pretty solid tackle prospect. You have a couple other guys out of state, a Samuel Rosenborough from Clearwater, Florida, who made a game visit this year. You have some out-of-state guys. And last week, Flood went to see Sam Utu at Orange Lutheran. He offered Cody Green, the right tackle at Mater Dei, committed to Oregon. Johnny Nansen went out to see the big 6'7", 320-pounder in Honolulu, who's expected on campus soon. So Texas has cast a wide net, but these in-state guys are going to get special attention from Steve Sarkisian this week up in the DFW area. But this is going to be a tremendous offensive line class because of the interest they've generated and all the guys scheduled to come on campus, and that it's a really good state crop in-state. So I don't think Texas is going to have any issue filling 4 or 5 spots with solid players in this class. And I think we could go to 5.
Really encouraging when you see them take care of the backyard and then expand outward after that. We won't go much longer in this recruiting breakdown episode, but Jerry, I do have some kind of quick hitter questions for
Yeah.
you. And you can expand as long as you want on these, but just enough to kind of fill up what questions we normally get in the chat. I'll say this, because I do think this is a smaller, more decisive class that Texas is bringing in comparison to last year that had maybe, 115, 120 prospects come to campus. Give me your thoughts real quick before we get into those quick hitter questions. The size of this junior day, because we just went through a number of the offensive guys. There aren't many, but we're looking at, a 50, 60 maybe person visit day ranging into 27 as well?
Yeah, I that's what it looks like. And I'm sure it'll end up being a few more than that, right? But they didn't extend some invites to some guys that we're kind of surprised about. We're not going to mention them here, but people have asked on ontexasfootball.com. We'll answer those questions, but they didn't extend as many invites in 26 as we expected them to. So, and I think it's twofold. One, the season ended January 10th. So Texas missed some days on the road evaluating. And I think if you bring kids in now and you don't offer them, then you may not be able to come back on those guys.
Yeah.
If you keep evaluating this class, bring those guys in February or March, you haven't brought them to campus and they've left disappointed already. That's something that kind of happened in last year's junior day, and Texas had to rebound on a couple of recruitments. But I also think it's this. There's also competition for January 25th. Notre Dame has a junior day. The teams that were in the playoffs, later in the playoffs, they all have junior days this weekend on the 25th. So you have more competition this weekend with national blue blood powers. So some of those guys that maybe you want on campus, they may be like, I want to go take a look at out-of-state school. I've been to your campus 2 times during the season. And you say, okay, we'll just come back in February then. And maybe it'll just be more intimate, you and your family and us one day, or for a couple hours one day. So I think it's twofold, but a lot of it's the schedule and the college football playoff. If you're in the playoff late, you miss days on the road evaluating and guys, and then you've missed some time here to really build that junior day list, because the reality is until 11 p.m. on January 10th, Texas thought they'd be playing on the 20th.
Right. That's exactly it. And that was what I was asking Coach Flood about when we were in Dallas for the Cotton Bowl. I was like, hey, how difficult is it to still be preparing for the next recruiting cycle when you're playing? He said, well, we're still playing, and that's the biggest recruiting pitch that we can give to these kids. To your point, though, when it comes to building and constructing a list for a junior day visit, afternoon, it does become a little bit taxing on these coaches who don't. I mean, I've said it time and time again, it doesn't feel like these guys ever get a day off. So none envious life at all, Jerry. But to those questions, I'll ask you, we'll go to the front 7 on the defensive side of guys coming in. Who sparks your interest on that front 7?
Dylan Berryman. I saw him last couple of weeks ago. He's an over-the-ball tilt player that I think Texas leads for. They just have to make that final push, and that doesn't mean they're absolutely going to win out. But he's 6'2", 315 up at Monroe, a Ouachita Parish High School. Really good over-the-ball player, one of the best in the country. Will Texas get Jamion Winfield in? He was at A&M over the weekend. I suspect Texas will find a way to get him down to campus. If they do, that's the number one for me. I mean, he's going to be right up there with any top defensive lineman in the country in this class, in my opinion. And he went on campus for a game this year, but that was a lot of kids. It was game day. So this would be, if he makes it in, this will be the first time he really gets a chance to sit down with Kenny Baker, Steve Sarkisian as a offered Texas prospect. Before, he was a guy they were watching because he moved in from Meridian, Mississippi. He would be a big one for me. Then, Yaha Gyad, the edge out of Tennessee, who's scheduled to be in. He thought about making the decision early January, January 2nd, I believe. Backed off of that, said he's going to visit Texas again. Where does that go with him when he sits down with Sarkisian and PK and those guys? Because the key here is how much does Sark want to push some of these guys right now? I think there's some guys that can commit to Texas, but the majority of those some guys aren't committing right now. They're going to go through the June official visit process, at least through the spring. You may see a guy like a Kosi Okpala, linebacker from May Creek, commit in March or April around his birthday, but he's be one of the rare ones. There's not a lot of guys who are going to commit in January or early February. They're going to play this out and go on their official visits and use their NIL leverage.
I think that's good stuff. One other name I'll add to that front seven is Jamarian Carlton. I got to see him down in San Antonio. Texas has been on him for a little bit I got to see him for the Navy All-American Bowl. He was one of the standouts for the 26 class that got to play in the 25 Bowl the first year they got to do that. He's high on Texas as well. He'll be making the trip. And Jerry, give me a guy that's under the radar for this 2026 class so far.
No, it's Donovan Webb. It's for Texas fans. It's Donovan Webb. He's not under the radar if you've kind of followed us. I think he's the top 150 prospect in the country. The safety out of Panther Creek, teammate and friend of Jalen Lott, really reminds me of Andrew Makuba. Just a highly productive, and I mean frame-wise, everybody's different player a little bit, but he's 6 foot 175, but he's a kind of a chiseled kid in early age, so he's gonna be 185, 190 pounder. But look, CJ, how many safeties make 115, 110 plus tackles 2 years in a row, have 9 interceptions, multiple kick punt returns for touchdowns, always around the ball, fumbles caused, fumbles recovered, 19 PBUs from a safety spot in 2 years of high school football, DFW. I think this guy's one of the best safeties in the country. Ohio State, Oklahoma, some of those people have offered him. Michigan later in the season. Early in the season, it was pretty much Ole Miss, TCU, SMU, Arkansas were some of those early offers. But this is a guy that Texas is bringing in Saturday, and I'll be surprised if they don't offer him. I just think the guy's a tremendous football player. And on some level, you just had Andrew Makuba, and was he a slider build than you ideally would want in the SEC? Potentially, but how many safeties are better than him in the SEC?
Yeah, exactly. That's a heck of a question.
Just a damn good football player. At some point, you just say, oh, well, this guy just tackles everybody. He picks off the ball. He's always around the ball, and he plays physical. You don't have 225 tackles in 2 years as a high school safety unless you're a physical player.
Right. I think that's a heck of a call. And if you haven't seen his film yet, go check it out. Of course, I think the safety hall coming in, Jerry, is really talented as well. When you include Jamarian Vincent out of Waco Connolly, who's high on Texas as well. Isaiah Williams out of Fort Bend Marshall, played with Caleb Chester last year. So worth mentioning that safety room. Pretty good so far after what was really a really solid safety group last year. Last question for you, because I know we'll get some in the chat, Jerry. You mentioned the timelines for some of these kids. A lot of them will go towards the summer, towards that July decision time. What can we expect coming out of this visit? Is it just kind of a wait and see? Or are there anybody's waiting to make those decisions immediately? Can Texas fans expect a commitment is really the question I'm asking you.
Publicly, we'll see. There's a silent commitment already that happened late in the season, during the season. We'll see when that one goes public. I think a lot of times Sark wants these guys to kind of, hey, are you actually done with this process? Because we don't want you to commit, and then in 2 months you say, you know what, I'm going to take my 5 visits anyways, right? So a lot of it's how it plays out. But do I think Texas will be told yes this weekend by more than one kid? Privately, silently, whatever you want to call it, I do. I think if you look for a position that tends to start committing earlier than maybe June official visits on some level, it could be offensive line.
Yep.
Those guys tend to come off the boards. Quarterbacks first. A lot of times your offensive line position is second. So we'll see there if any of those offensive linemen maybe give Texas the nod privately, but maybe not publicly this weekend.
Well, good deal, Jerry. Before we get out of here, one quick word from Mark Saunders and our sponsor, Allstate, for this weekend's recruiting breakdown. Yeah, when it comes to protecting all your stuff, Texas Allstate agent Mark Saunders is your guy. Austin and Round Rock area, the entire state of Texas. He's the only insurance agent you will need. There's been hundreds of On Texas Football family members that have gone to Mark Saunders for all their needs: home, car, boat, motorcycle, RV, and ATV. Do what those other Texas fans have done. Call Texas Allstate agent Mark Saunders' office today, 512-218-8571. You'll be in great hands with the more than 35 years of experience of Texas alum Mark Saunders. Again, Austin and Round Rock area, entire state of Texas. He is the only insurance agent you'll need. 512-218-8571. Perfect. Thank you, Jerry. And thank you again, Mark Saunders, for sponsoring this weekend's recruiting breakdown. We will have more for you here on Texas Football, the YouTube channel, this weekend. We'll likely multiple videos, depending on what goes down, of course. But Saturday specifically, after the events wrap up on the 40 acres, we'll have an update for you, as well as over on ontexasfootball.com. A lot going on. We're fully into the offseason. I know, Texas fans, it's here. Long way to go till August 30th of next year, but we got you covered. But for now, Gerry Hamilton, I'm CJ Vogel. Thank you very much for watching, and y'all have a good one. Welcome.